Hey, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we are interviewing an individual who's raised over $60,000, one of the 1,000 backers for a publishing campaign, specifically a nonfiction publishing campaign. You know, the other day I was talking to someone who, I was telling them what I did, right? And they're like, I didn't even know people still read books, right? So if you don't know anything, I've written like 10 books at this point in my life. And I've written one book specifically about Kickstarter that is really popular called the Kickstarter Launch Formula, which also is available on Audible, which I can share with you how to get a copy of that if you want at the end of this podcast. So I've written a lot of books, and I was talking to this person and they're like, dude, I didn't even know people still read books, right? There's this like common belief that for some reason people don't read books anymore. And it's so false. It is completely a logical fallacy. There are so many people that love reading books. And also, when it comes to doing a Kickstarter campaign, this is actually a really thriving category. And I think today's episode is going to demonstrate that to you, how this individual is able to raise $60,000 to be able to produce season 5 of Boss Fight Books. So these are like new, basically, books on classic video games. So Red Dead Redemption, Resident Evil, Zelda, a lot of cool stuff. So you're gonna hear about that today. Starting a publishing company is not something that you might think about in 2020, right? Or in 2021. But it's actually, there's no reason why you can't do it. It's actually a little bit easier, I think, than it was previously, because now you can go directly to the end customer. And you can start a publishing company based around your fans, based around a tribe of people that want these books to exist. Put it this way, if I was to try and write a bunch of books as an author in today's environment, and to get a literary agent and to have this go through like a marketing team and all that kind of stuff, it would take forever, man. It would take forever for anyone to write a book. However, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, why not just go directly to my fans? And that's exactly what I did with the Kickstarter Launch Formula. That's exactly what I did with my other books as well. Is just, why not sell it directly to my fans? I don't need a marketer to push my book. I already have an audience, right? And you can do the same thing when it comes to Kickstarter. You can just build up an audience of people and do this in record amount of time using some of the techniques I talk about on this podcast. Get that tribe going, get a bunch of funding within the first couple of days, and then you are smooth sailing with your Kickstarter campaign and continue to raise funds. So I hope you liked today's podcast episode for Boss Fight Books Season 5, Into the Darkness. It is coming up right after this. One other quick thing I want to mention was I do have a weekly crowdfunding tips newsletter. This newsletter is kind of like the sum culmination of some of the stuff I'm learning in the industry. I'm always learning. I've been in this industry since 2012, but at the same time, I recognize that marketing is always changing. There are always new tools. There are always new techniques that are coming to light. So selfishly, one of the reasons why I have this podcast is to stay on top of that, right? To always be on top of what's happening in the crowdfunding industry. So I'd rather, do that than just continuing to try and use like old, outdated methods that don't work anymore. So I kind of distill a lot of that in the Crowdfunding Tips newsletter. Some of the stuff that I'm learning, some of the stuff that is still working, some of the things you should be doing and applying to your campaign. If you want to join that newsletter, just go to crowdcrux.com/newsletter, crowdcrux.com/newsletter. Join the email newsletter there, and you'll start getting emails from me. That being said, let's jump right into today's podcast episode with Boss Fight Books. It's coming up right after this. This podcast episode is sponsored by The Gadget Flow. The Gadget Flow reaches over 28 million people, and they've been around since 2012. They are Indiegogo and Kickstarter experts. They featured over 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns, and if you have a technology or design campaign, it is a great platform to generate awareness and get backers. You can check them out at thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today. Gabe, welcome so much to the show.
Thanks for having me.
To get started, could you give the listeners a bit of an idea of your product, your project, and kind of who this is for? Just describe it for them.
Sure. So Boss Fight Books came about in 2013, and at a time when I realized there wasn't a lot of book-length explorations of video games out there, particularly when you did see books about games in the nonfiction space. It was kind of more like vast industry history, like this is a whole book about the history of Atari or of Nintendo. And, some of those books are really good, but what they can't do is really like slow down and explore games from that like critical and historical and personal place that that can happen when you really dig in. And so we kind of came about with this idea of one game, one book. So just doing these short books about individual games by different authors with really different takes. So some books are more just like development history. Others are critical deep dive. Sometimes authors will kind of talk about their own experience with the game and playing the game or returning to the game after a long time, which really kind of fits the format because, video games are themselves so interactive. So we've been doing that, like I said, since 2013. And so we call them seasons of books. This new season is 5 new books that we're going to be rolling out across the course of the next year.
When it comes to the actual book, like, would you consider these to be nonfiction? Or are they more like fun in nature, or are the people that are reading them, are they kind of game developers or people that are like hardcore players that are interested in it, or who's really interested, I guess?
Yeah, it's a pretty big group of people. There's definitely game developers, and in fact, to date, our most popular book is called Spelunky by Derek Yu, which is about how he, a game developer, made a very popular indie game that's also been really influential since then. So a lot of people have respect for him as a creator, and so getting into his mind and exploring his process is like really exciting to them. But that said, yeah, you have a lot of hardcore gamers. You also have a lot of people who are just like interested in video games as a subject, who maybe they played as a kid and don't haven't continued to follow it, or maybe they do and they're just kind of like looking into games in a deeper way. And so that's kind of yeah, we kind of try to get a good cross section of people from within and outside of the game space. But what we do try to do is make it like welcoming for people who are not immediately already like immersed in the game. Like, we're always trying to pull in people where it's like, it's fine if you never have played this game and don't even know much about it. Like, we'll try to catch you up and then explore it together.
Very cool. It kind of reminds me of, Masterclass, like those YouTube ads you always get, like learning from, important people. It's kind of like
Absolutely.
that, but like for books, right? For
That's
gaming.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen those commercials all the time. Never seen a masterclass, but yeah. And I think too that like we've seen this kind of book in a lot of other art forms. We've seen like books about books. We've seen books about movies. Our biggest inspiration was called 33 and a Third, which is books about albums, and often written by like games journalists and that kind of thing. And I think those are really cool. And I think like those are a great like book length space to really respect and investigate an art form. And since video games just have only been around for, however many decades that you want to start counting, but they haven't quite, like, writing about games has taken a while to catch up, and it certainly has. And we're proud to be a part of that. But also online, even since we've started Boss Fight Books, we've just seen a lot more deeper and more in depth and more respectful of the form and its possibilities and its flaws and weaknesses, and just kind of everything that you see in these like more established art forms, people are writing about with video games. And so we're really excited to be a part of that.
Were you like a publisher before, or you were just enthusiastic about games? Like, what were you doing before Boss Fight Books came about?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I was a writer before, and I'm still a writer. But that's kind of how I came to this. Was I studied writing in college, and then I got an MFA in creative writing. And so for a long time, I was focusing on my own fiction writing, and then was kind of like getting a lot more interested in nonfiction. Just also at a time when I was I'd kind of gone away from video games for a while. I'd played them a ton, but then I was kind of trying to focus on my own stuff and kind of building my career. But then when I kind of started checking back in on the scene again, I was really interested in what I was seeing. And so I had, edited some things before, like a couple of literary magazines, and I was really used to like giving feedback to friends about their own writing in a casual way. So I felt like I was kind of already building up some of the skills. But all that said, the business aspect of this was brand new to me. And so it was really just kind of a trial by fire of having an idea, having a vision for what the books could be, and then kind of having to play catch up in terms of like how to execute it.
I mean, starting a publishing company is quite rare nowadays. I think it's something
Yeah.
where like indie publishing it's so difficult to figure out the business model. And now Kickstarter offers this way to actually connect with those readers, that want to see these things created.
Yeah, and Kickstarter has been with us since the beginning. It was like that. It was that first campaign that they gave us the seed money to create the books in the first place, but also that was the test balloon that made us realize, okay, there's a market. There's people who are excited about this too, and I'm not the only one. So
For you, what is the most like part that gets you the most excited about this? Like, is it the working with the authors and getting all of that knowledge on paper? So like kind of like archiving it and cataloging it for future generations? Is it the actual business side of it? Like, what do you like most?
yeah, I think it's like the building of this big catalog of work and and like trying to like go farther in all these different directions and with different writers in different styles about really different games and just trying to kind of hit like the history and impact of gaming from all these different angles so that and a lot of the time people would just read like one or two of our books and that's great, but I'm so excited about the idea of like if you eventually can kind of zoom out from the series and like look at all that we've done, then I think it will contain a lot of interesting stuff and we can hopefully just kind of look at our body of work and say this is what do I want to say? I think like we look at our body of work and just be proud that we've really like took this idea as far as we could in terms of like digging into the history and investigating and maybe hoping to kind of make our mark on
Yeah, your
gaming in a
legacy.
small way.
Yeah, your legacy.
Make our legacy. So it's kind of that. But you said like working with authors, and that absolutely too is just like that kind of like shaping a book together. Like I really believe in like the drafting process, and basically most books start as total messes, and I know mine do, and so like getting to watch the kind of like almost magical process of seeing like ideas form and having a lot of potential and then giving notes and they work on it and come back and you're doing that back and forth sometimes over the course of like a couple of years it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean it's an entire creative process, and to be honest, I think that the creative side, it's obviously really cool, but it's so rare you meet people who have both, like both the creative side and the business side, right? Because usually you're either like the creative type, kind of in the sky, and like you're writing and stuff. It's hard to kind of bring that together into a profitable company, but it seems like you've been able to do both, which is pretty cool. So for those out there that are interested in running a Kickstarter campaign, what are some of the things you've learned over the course of all these different projects you've done? Have you done like 5 by now or so?
Yeah, we've done these 5 seasons and then we did another like mini one. So yeah, 6 campaigns. And yeah, they've all been funded and successful. I think I've got a lot. I think one thing, I think I might have some like advice that's kind of to first timers and then to other people who are kind of continuing their projects. I think especially if you haven't done a Kickstarter campaign before, there's so much of the work should be in kind of how you are presenting the work that you've already done and then who you are. Like ideally, you should try to get a lot done before you ever show it to people. And sometimes that's just not possible, and I know that like for our first campaign, we had way less written from the authors than we did this season. Like we're really deep into all these books, some of which are already finished, and we just finished funding the campaign. But it wasn't like that in the beginning. But at least we had these authors articulate their vision for what each of their books would be like, and at least we had covers. We had our first designer was Ken Bauman, and our current cover designer is Corey Schmitz. And, each of them have just been really great at creating and defining a series aesthetic, saying like, here's what the books are going to look like. And, whether they're ebooks or paperbacks, and we do both. And so like giving those like descriptions of like, here's what the books will be. Here's our vision for them. Here's how we're going to do it. And then staying in touch with backers, like answering their questions, trying to show that we've done our homework and that and that this isn't going to be one of those bad Kickstarter experiences, because even by 2013, like the honeymoon period of Kickstarter was already ending like by then, in terms of like, people get burned and, they back things that
Don't turn out good. Yeah.
funded. They don't turn out good. And it's so we just want to signal that, hey, we're really serious about this. We're working really hard. There's things outside of our control. And, and I'd say the thing that Boss Fight is the guiltiest of is, some of our books have taken way longer than we thought they would. But I've found that, like, as long as that's because you really want to deliver a high quality product, and when you do, people really like it, then they'll really forgive that, because people want something when they want it, but more than that, they want something really good.
Yeah. You want it to be worth the wait, in other words.
Yeah. And I think too, like, you want to show that you're kind of willing to stake your own reputation on this, which might sound kind of dramatic, but I think people want to see you coming forward and saying, here's who I am, here's what I plan to do. And so again, like, if you were not to deliver on what you said you would do, like, there might be some real world repercussions for you. Yeah.
What did it feel like when you had this idea, you're a writer and you decide to come out with this first project, and then you get funded and you have 1,000 backers or so? What did that feel like for you?
It was really exciting and really surprising, actually, because, part of like the scene that I had been a part of as a writer was for a long time, it was kind of like, especially when you're starting out, it's like writers reading other writers, and you're excited and you're doing this thing together, but you kind of like know this small scene. So to kind of like have a project that breaks out of that, and to suddenly have this long list of, however many, it was like 1,300 or so backers in that first campaign, of just people who I'd never heard of. It was like, wow, where did they come from and how did they find us? And it was, it felt like magic. And then having all those people, like, it really, I think like the benefit of the crowdfunding is it really gives you this wave of motivation to do a good job, because it's not suddenly just you trying to do a project well, like you always do. It's like, you feel like the excitement and expectations of all these people.
When you were like telling your friends about this, like, what did that conversation sound like? Did they even know like Kickstarter was a thing at that point?
I think just about everybody knew about Kickstarter already, but I think that it was, I think the hardest thing was like kind of describing the project to people and kind of like learning trial by fire to how to like articulate vision of like what our project would be. And that was really useful for building the Kickstarter itself, because I'd be like, okay, well, we want to do these books. And they're like, so you want to do novels about video games? It's like, well, no, it's not going to be fiction. We don't even have the license to like a Mario novel if we wanted to. And like, okay, so they're game guides. Well, no, they're not about how to beat the game, because people can already look that stuff up online, and we're kind of more interested.
Yeah.
Just
it's more
those
like
conversations,
documenting kind of.
Yes. And so, yeah. And in fact, like, I've learned to use the word documentary style, because that immediately tells people like what we're up to. And it also, documentaries are really different from each other. And so it kind of gives us like specificity, but also like room to do lots of different things.
All of a sudden you got all this funding, you have all this validation, and now you kind of have to like build a team and build a business, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I think those are a lot of new skill sets, particularly if you come from a writer's background. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like other creative types out there that want to build a business, do you have any advice on that in terms of important things you need to focus on, or skills that you need to master, et cetera?
Yeah, I think like part of what you have to figure out for yourself is like, what are your strengths? What are the things that you enjoy doing the most? And what are the things that you would be happy to outsource to other people? And then on top of that, it's like, what is like financially possible to outsource to other people? So for instance, for us, like, I've never learned how to do layout, like to take it from like the Google Doc that we've been working on into the format that makes it look nice as a book. But we have a guy named Christopher Moyer, who we've been working on this for years now, who's just fantastic about that. And he makes our books look so beautiful. And so we just kind of we've negotiated with something with him. And that's such a nice thing to like take off my plate of like having to like learn and develop this new skill. It's not that I couldn't, but it would take a lot of time. And so there's a lot of things like that. And one of the big things,
are you looking for help with the fulfillment side of your rewards on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or any other crowdfunding website? Fulfillrite is literally the gold standard when it comes to crowdfunding reward fulfillment. These guys will help you ship out your products, your packages, your orders to all of your customers and your backers. They've been working in this industry for a really long time. I totally vouch for their services, and they'll even do things like answer simple questions for you on fulfillment and shipping and figuring out how to get your products into the hands of your customers in the easiest way possible. If you're interested in learning more about them, you can go to fulfillrite.com or crowdcrux.com/fulfillrite, and that will take you to them. Again, that is FULFILLRITE.com.
During that first season was starting out kind of on my own, reading all these books, and then pretty soon starting to work with Michael Williams, who started out as one of our authors, but he was so invested in the project and we had such a good working relationship that he stayed on and continued to edit all the books with me. Mm-hmm. And so then suddenly it's not just me, kind of being like the quality control. And we also have like some different skill sets, and he comes from a different background than I do. And so we find that like that's really complementary. So I think it's a lot about like building your team, figuring out what you want to outsource, things that aren't your strength, like the cover design. Like I can give a lot of notes about it, but I really don't want to be the guy in Photoshop making it all look good. So relying on, I'm not like a talented visual artist. But relying on people who are, it's important. It's important, but it's also like exciting because suddenly like you're bringing your project to new heights that like you couldn't achieve if you were just doing it on your own, even though there is always like that part of me that's like, I just want to do everything and keep it small and slow. It's kind of that like protective parent.
Yeah. I think it's also important because the more ideas you get in there, the more it can percolate and you come up with like end products that are so different than what you originally imagined, So it's really good from a creativity standpoint. One of the questions I had for you on that point was, you're producing so many books about so many different games. How do you decide which games that you want to focus on? Like, do you analyze the community around the game, or is it more like a gut feel?
We're taking a lot of stuff into consideration. Most of the time, the subject of a book is not just solely determined by us, but it's rather like an author who has a particular book that they're really excited about, and they come to us with a pitch and say like, here's my vision for this book. Here's why I think like this game kind of deserves it. And here's like the angle that I think would serve it really well. And then, so they kind of, so this is kind of also the lesson of like involving other people. So it's not just this top down thing of like, here's the 50 most popular games, now let's get to it. But rather like bringing in the ideas that I would never have. Like our next book is about the game Red Dead Redemption, and this guy Matt Margini, he's so smart and he's coming from such a particular place. Like he's coming from a place of like scholarship, but also just knowledge about like the genre of the Western, and that informs the book so much. And I never would have said like, well, if we're going to do a Red Dead book, we have to make it, about how it fits into this long lineage of the Western and the story that America is telling itself. And like, that's not necessarily what would have occurred to me, but it's so exciting that then like he came to us with this idea. And so we said yes. So that said though, every Kickstarter campaign, we have this voting period, which really kind of, it's a really fun way to just like energize your backers and to get everybody talking, because it all takes place in the comments section of our Kickstarter, where basically everybody first like nominates games that they think would make a good book, and then eventually votes on the finalists. And so we actually just announced today the new one, which is a PlayStation 1 game called Xenogears. And so that's the one that the community has decided on. So we're going to find an author to write it, but they're the ones who said, like, that's what we want. And so they've done that with Chrono Trigger and Shadow of the Colossus, Final Fantasy VI, Red Dead, and now this one. And like, that's cool. I love that it doesn't always happen that way, but I also love that sometimes it does.
Co-creation.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
I like that too. It also kind of gives people a bit more ownership. Like they feel like it's kind of, they're part of the project. Then you're just like, here, I made this thing, now go fund it. It's more of like you're making it with them,
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to your experience here with Kickstarter, you had a bunch of different successes. Going into a new campaign, what's on the top of your mind? Like, I would say, let's just say like 2 weeks before you go live, like what are you making sure you're getting in order to really have a explosive launch?
Yeah, I'll say that, like, I think those 2 weeks might be like the hardest work of the whole thing, like culminating in day one. Like, this last month that we just wrapped our campaign, there's been a lot of work for sure, but I think that was the hardest, was just ramping up to the launch and making sure that day one went well. And then the rest is mostly kind of fallout from that work that you've already done. One of those things that I'd really recommend to people, if you already exist as a company, just make sure you have a really good consolidated email mailing list. And only in the last year have I started paying for one. And once I did, I've kind of been kicking myself for not doing it sooner, because I can just see from the traffic going to the campaign that like a huge percentage of the people who backed this campaign are people who just are either backers from before, or customers from our online store, or people who signed up for our mailing list, either online or at a live event, or just, all these different ways that like people come to us, and having them together in one big list, and then being able to send that day one email of like, we have 5 new books and I really want you to check them out. And even that first email, like, I didn't even say much about the campaign. I didn't even name the games. I was just like, please go check out this Kickstarter. And they did. And that was a lot of what kind of started off that campaign.
Two questions about that. One is, you said paying. What do you mean by that?
Oh, sure. So I think like Mailchimp is the biggest one, but when I looked into it, it was a little more expensive. I'm using one called Sendinblue. And it's basically, I either pay a monthly or quarterly fee to use, their service, which will take care of, so it puts all the emails together, and you can send a blast of emails out to everyone, a mass email to everyone. And it's really easy to unsubscribe to, which is super important because you don't want people getting mad at you. And so, and also everybody who's on the list has already opted in. But yeah, it's just like adds this, and they've got nice templates. And so it adds this like air of professionalism that looks nicer than when it's just coming straight from our company Gmail account.
Mm-hmm. I'll have to check that out. I'm probably overpaying for Mailchimp.
Yeah, do
it. When it comes to the emails, like you mentioned, just basically saying I'm running a Kickstarter, go and check it out. Why do you think people ended up doing that? Like, why do you think it's so unique that those people on your list were willing to do that when maybe you do that other places and they don't as much?
Yeah. Well, one thing I thought of when I was just thinking about this conversation with you was there's this really crucial moment after the first campaign was successful. I wasn't sure if I should ever do a Kickstarter again, because like at heart, like Kickstarter was like kickstarting not just that season of books, but like the company, and just like kickstarting the idea of us and all this stuff. And I was like, would people show up a second time? And I was like at this pho place in LA, and this guy, I started talking to him, and it turned out he was like, he'd made his money in like some tech 1.0, like web 1.0 kind of stuff. And he was just like this like older, or older than me, guy who just had done a lot of business. And so I was just picking his brain about it. And he's like, well, listen, if something worked really well the first time, you do it again. So, and it was like such like beautiful, simple advice. I just take
like
it with
doy,
me this whole time. Yeah. And it clicked. I was putting so much effort into mental effort into like, well, I don't want to bother people. And, that's like some of my own personal, it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't want them to be annoyed that I'm coming to them again for more money. But the truth is, like, people were happy to do it. And this is, I think there's two kinds of crowdfunding campaigns. One is like, hey, we're making a film, and like you don't really get anything except like the job well done feeling of helping creative people. And those are awesome, but those are also really hard to run.
Hmm.
And then there's ones like ours that are like, hey, we could really use your help by getting these pre-orders for the books that are going to happen. And that's like an easier ask for a lot of people, I think, because they're getting a tangible product, and they're just and they're just saying like, hey, yeah, we trust you to do a good job. We know that it takes a lot of money to like print and to work on these in the meantime, and that there's so many expenses, and so we're happy to give you the money now.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's what's kind of happened every time. And, and there's a lot of factors that you can't account for. I kind of expected with COVID stuff, I modified our expectations to be like, well, people, things might be tighter now, or, for any number of reasons, this one might not go as well, and I just have to be okay with that. And then it was our best one yet. Like it broke our
Yes,
records
exactly.
for how well we've done.
I did an article recently on the way that COVID is affecting Kickstarter, and
interesting.
One of my
What did you find?
conclusions was that there are about a 35% drop in the number of creators launching projects, but the backer community is literally the same. So it's almost like you're going up against less demand. You're going up the same amount of demand. Yeah.
So you're getting a bigger like attention share of people who like following campaigns and
exactly
seeing interesting stuff. Yeah.
One
That's
other
great.
question,
Well, that's my experience.
one other question I had for you on that front of you sort of embracing the crowdfunding model is, it looks like you guys also offer Patreon subscriptions with this one project, the season 5. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Let's see. So we don't do Patreon. I'm interested. So what? Yeah. What are?
Is it a
you...
patron subscription? Patron?
Oh. Well, we did. Yeah. Oh, we did like patron tier, where we basically, I think we put it out there to have like a top tier where we're saying like,
It was like the $500 one, yeah.
Yes, the $500 one of like, this is a way for you to like, you're going to get cool stuff, but also like you're really like supporting the press. And I think, you never know if people are going to go for those or not. But I think I think it's important to create a space to saying like, if you're in a position where you can be generous with us and you have the funds to do it, here's how you would do it, and we really appreciate it.
So it's like a digital subscription kind of thing.
Yeah, so the subscription model is like huge for our books because even though people can, so there's 5 books in this set, and even though people can get 1 or 2 of them, we are kind of like pushing people toward, hey, for like $25, you can just get a digital subscription where we'll just send you each of the ebooks every time it comes out, or for $75 plus shipping, we'll send you each of the paperbacks when it comes out, and we'll also send you the ebooks. And so it's kind of like, yeah.
I think I got confused because that's like exactly what Patreon, like that model is.
Yes, yeah. And so it's kind of trying to do that kind of thing, but from the Kickstarter platform, which I'm more native to and has worked well for us.
Okay, cool. Interesting. Another question I had for you when it came to your video is, your video is pretty straightforward and like pretty simple. And I think a lot of people get like hung up in making a really, professional quality video that's like almost overdone. What are your thoughts on that, the video?
Yeah, I think that I've thought about this a lot lately because actually this video that we did for season 5 is the lowest tech video. Usually we would bring in, it's always been simple, but at least we would bring in a guy who is a director and has a really nice camera, and we do like multiple angles and shoot, just put it all together so it looks really crisp and clean. And, I'm in quarantine and I'm not going to ask him to come do that. And so I filmed it on my laptop and I got my friend to edit it, and she did a great job. But that's it. And I think for me, it kind of goes back to a philosophy with crowdfunding and with the press in general, which is like, I really prefer to lead with sincerity and gratitude than with being like really either like funny or cool or slick. And, you know, like I have like a very like smart ass side of me, and I really like letting that out. But I don't think that this is the place for it. And I think that like, and the fact is like, I do sincerely care about this stuff a lot, and I'm thinking about it a lot, and I'm working hard on it. And so to be like vulnerable enough with your audience to just show up and say like, hey guys, here I am again. We've got these books. We've been working really hard on them. I think you're gonna love them. You know, it's like, it's such a simple thing to say,
really well,
but
too.
it's also like I believe all of that, you know, and in a way, like that's kind of like the most honest way that I can come to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing I'll say is like, a lot of people just skip past the video anyway. Like, they're just like, and maybe they didn't do that as much in the beginning, but at this point, people, a lot of our backers are returning. They've already know what the books are. And so they're like, you know, they'll just go past the video. They'll be like, yeah, I got it. And then they'll look at what the books are. What do they look like? They'll look at the descriptions. And it's more like the visual part of the page that's below the video that makes so much more of a difference to them.
And this was your highest funded one?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Who would have thought? Like, it's so interesting to me that approach. It works very well. It's almost like some people overthink it, you know, whereas you just were like straight from the heart, you know, good quality, but not like too much produced, and it really seemed to connect pretty well.
Yeah, and I wonder too, like maybe that's partly because like we're focusing on the things that like are more connected to publishing. Like, so, you know, we want the visuals of the books to look really good. We want the copy to be really good about the games. And like, ultimately, we're not movie makers, we're book publishers. And so if you were doing a Kickstarter for a movie,
good point.
Your movie probably, your movie about the movie should probably also be pretty good.
Yeah, very good point. I love this one octopus artwork you got here on Final Fantasy.
Yes.
That looks really cool.
Yeah, it's a fun reference to there's this octopus enemy in the game, and when you fight him, you're in in this opera house, and so much of this like the opera house winds up being a really important thing in the book because Final Fantasy, it's our first book that's just almost entirely about music, which is really exciting to me because I love music and I also love focusing on aspects of games that we haven't gotten to dig into as much. Mm-hmm. And so this is a guy who's like a writer, but he's also a like music expert. You know, he's worked as an opera singer before, and so he's analyzing the music of this game and showing like how that reflects like each of the characters, and you know, looking at like the larger scope of the Final Fantasy longtime series composer Uematsu. So we try to like kind of nudge. There's often like a little like signal about like the content of like what's going to be in the book, or sometimes it's just like a fun, silly reference to something in the game itself.
Very cool, very cool. So I just have like one or two more questions for you. One of them is, you know, in our pre-interview, you were mentioning a little bit about being a big fish in a small pond versus being a small fish in a big one, and I just kind of want you to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. So I think, you know, basically like our project could either fit in the video games part of Kickstarter, or they could fit in the publishing part of Kickstarter. And so it's like, do we want to like put ourselves in with like what we're writing about, or do we want to just put ourselves in with writing? And we found that publishing works better than video games. Video games are a much bigger share of what Kickstarter does. Video game projects often are like have been some of the most successful. Video games and tabletop games have been some of the most successful projects on Kickstarter at all. So I think there's like some motivation to show up in that feed. But I don't know, for us, it seems to have worked better to put ourselves in the publishing category. Suddenly, like we're the biggest fish in, maybe not publishing, but at least I think maybe the whole time we were the biggest fish in publishing nonfiction, like the subcategory. And the fact that we were just like dominant there on that page means that like anybody leafing through that stuff is going to find us. And it also means that like Kickstarter is going to give us the projects we love label, which is a nice boost. And I think helps ensure people's confidence in the project in general. And so, yeah, I think like maybe, it's hard. It's a little hard for me to say like how that would extend to other people doing really different projects. But I think there is something to be said for, just kind of showing up and being kind of like the king of that smaller pond.
I think it makes the people that are checking out publishing, I mean, they're more likely to convert than someone's who's into gaming, because they might be looking for a game to play, right? So it's a little bit more
that
focused.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So I think that could definitely play in, where you're sacrificing a little bit of your ego, like wanting to compete against the big boys, but at the end of the day, it's
right.
like
the new like Edmund Macmillan game that just came out. Yeah,
you're in the right pond,
that's true. It's like it is the most like factually correct. So maybe that's like the simpler answer is just go with the one that is closest to what you're really doing.
My last question for you here is, as it relates to you being an indie publisher and everything you found out about, running a business and such, what advice can you impart to people out there that maybe it's their first or their second Kickstarter and they're not exactly sure how they should be growing things? Like they had maybe one success, or they're going to be focusing on the email list, like you said. Like what else should they be doing, you think, to really make the most of their time?
I think if you're working on that Kickstarter, then one thing that you should be doing is getting in touch with people who have already been excited about what you're doing, and kind of assume in good faith that they'll be happy to hear from you again. And so using that preview period before you launch your Kickstarter can be really useful to just come to some people and say, hey, like we're excited about this. We're getting close to launching it. I just wanted to show it to you early, and maybe like would love to get your help sharing it once it's launched. And I think the effect of that is, I think people, it can feel weird like reaching out for a favor, but also people like supporting things that they care about. And if you've kind of already done the hard work of putting out some good things before, of getting a proven track record, then people will actually like, it's not just like them doing you a favor, but it is that, but it's also like they're happy to be involved. Like they're a part of the team in some small way. And I think too, like, and part of that, like with us, like the team is always like, it's not just me and Mike who run the press, but it's also the authors for whatever the season of books is. And like, if there's occasion for other people to like really take ownership of the campaign, then that's great. Because, the authors in this case are people who also really want this campaign to do well. They want their book to succeed. So they have every reason to get more involved and shout about it online and the whole bit.
Awesome, man. Where can people go to learn a bit more about some of the books you've come out with? I think they're like 18, right? Books you've published or so?
We got 23 that are out.
23, wow.
Now, and then the next, and then we got five new ones that we're working on. Very cool. They can go to bossfightbooks.com, and that's our web store. And it's also just got links to the page for all of the books. And one cool thing is, if you're just kind of interested in checking them out, is we always find a way to do an excerpt of the book somewhere online, often at Kotaku, the video game site, but sometimes elsewhere. And so if you just want to get a sense of what we're up to, click on a game that a book that looks interesting to you, and you can always kind of click through and do that, and check out Goodreads reviews and Amazon reviews, and just kind of see what speaks to you.
The other thing I love you got on the site is this bundle that you're offering. That would be such a cool, oh man, dude, if you did in the future like a Kickstarter where you made like a really high class kind of a bundle where you're offering like this entire, all these books, all these games that you documented over the years, and having it be like a box set, like that would be cool, and like looking really nice, like a Barnes and Noble, that would be really cool.
Right. And we've thought about it too. It's like, it's like we want to make sure if we do that we do it just right. But like, that is exciting to think about. I totally agree.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Good luck with your next project, and look forward to having you back sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Dude, wasn't this episode crazy? Like, I can't believe just the number of publishing companies that I'm actually seeing getting started as a result of Kickstarter, and also just getting started online. I think this, it really is, it's weird to say, right? Because we think of publishing, we think of books and like Barnes & Noble, and we think that a lot of these companies are outdated or it's like a dying industry or something like that. But in reality, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, I think we're actually going through a publishing revolution. And here's why. First of all, as a publishing creator, as an entrepreneur, you can get funding directly from your fans using Kickstarter. Just imagine raising $60,000 to be able to make a book. Like that's incredible. That's an unheard of, I think. And for an individual author to be able to do that, that is really freaking cool. And that can only exist because, number one, of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, these different crowdfunding sites. Number two, the ability to build a tribe online. And number three, being able to structure an online launch, which I talk about in the Kickstarter launch formula. These are the three things that really go into making that available to the public. And also think about all the other publishing mediums that are now available, besides from just doing ebooks or doing audiobooks and incorporating other things like podcasting, I think is more of a publishing medium, honestly. And also artwork, being able to assemble artists from around the world using virtual working. This is something like you would normally have to work with artists who are in your local area, right? Or you'd have to work with people who are writing the story or helping you with the writing of the book. You can only do that in your local area, but nowadays you can do that online. You can do that with people who are around the world. They don't even have to be in that same time zone as you. If you really want it to be productive, you could be in your own individual time zone. Let's just say you're in New York. You then have other people working for you who are in Germany. You then have other people working for you who are in Southeast Asia, other people who are in California, and you literally have a 24-hour workforce for a fraction of the cost. That is so like that's a magnificent gift. It's an incredible opportunity, and something that you, even if you're not doing a book, you're not publishing a book, but you're doing something like a technology gadget or a board game or a tabletop or a video game, whatever, right? This is something that you can take advantage of. And it all starts with building your team, right? Building your team. So that being said, if you want to discover a little bit about the Kickstarter launch formula, the book that I wrote, you can get an Audible version at crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. That is crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio, crowdcrux.com/Kickstarter audio. And finally, if you want to start to look a little bit into your project more deeply and get a sense of what you got to do right in order to be successful with your specific category, your specific product, the resources you have available to you, and then you can book a one-on-one coaching call with me. I don't treat any project the same. Like there really is not a boilerplate launch plan. It's kind of ironic, right? Because I wrote the book, The Kickstarter Launch Formula. So in some ways there is, but in other ways it really does vary based on the category in which you're launching under, and also varies based on your resources. So someone who has a really big launch budget, like a 30 to 40K launch budget, versus another person who only has $5,000 or even $4,000 to put into a launch, I'm going to give these two people very different advice, right? Or someone who wants to hire me versus hire an agency versus do it themselves, I'm going to give them very different advice on a coaching call. And we're going to, tailor that to them and also the response that they're getting already from the product. It really varies across the board. So I feel like this is a good way to fill in some of the gaps where you're not just getting broad information and broad strokes of how to do one of these things, but it's really tailored for you from someone who knows what they're doing. So if you want to book a one-on-one coaching call with me, you can go to the link crowdcrux.com/coaching. That is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching. Give me a little bit of information about you, your project, what you're trying to do, and we can book a one-on-one coaching call ASAP. The other thing that's kind of not well known is the reason why I got into this industry. So when I was in college, I was doing a mini econ thesis at George Washington University. and I was doing a logistic regression because we had to, and it was basically comparing different categories on Kickstarter. So I was looking at the gaming category versus the dance category versus theater versus publishing versus technology, gadgets, and gizmos and design and stuff like that. And I was comparing these different categories because at the time, Kickstarter was only offering aggregate statistics and information about these categories. And people like Ethan Mollick were doing studies on aggregate Kickstarter statistics. I'm like, dude, that doesn't make sense because clearly launching a book is very different than launching a physical product versus very different from launching a board game. So naturally, the variables that affect success are going to be different from category to category in the same way that entrepreneurs, depending on the category or the product you're selling on Amazon, is going to be very different than marketing, right? And for some reason, I don't know why, but people didn't clearly grasp that concept when I was just getting started. So I wrote a logistic regression report on that, and I started to blog some of my findings. And that's where the seed of what is now crowdcrux.com kind of started to come into the picture back in 2012, is I started to just publish some of my findings and some of the stuff that I was learning. This is so important to me because all too often, I think we really generalize and we put out broad information, but it's only once it becomes specific and tailored to you that it becomes valuable and something you can actually use to generate income and revenue for your business and make your dreams happen. This has happened so much as a frustration in my own life where people give me advice and I'm like, okay, I follow the advice and it doesn't work, right? Or it's really misguided advice. And the reason is they're either giving advice to themselves secretly or they're giving advice to a general mass of people, which isn't applicable to me. So it's really frustration. That's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this podcast. That being said, hope you enjoyed today's episode. Go and check out some of the other ones we got out there in the archives, and I will see you next time.